would like to introduce, and it's my pleasure to introduce Erin Jones. Erin has 26 years of experience in education, having taught in diverse communities across the U.S. She was a candidate for Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction and has received several awards, including Washington State Milken Educator of the Year in 2008 and recognition as a champion of change at the White House in 2013. Erin has taught, served as an instructional coach, and worked in leadership roles for 2 state superintendents. She was also the first Black woman to run for a statewide office in Washington, losing her race for superintendent by 1%. Erin is married to James, who is a teacher, and they have 2 children in college. Erin, welcome to the CCA of WA Webinar. Bienvenida, Erin.
Muchísimas gracias. Glad to be here. Hello, everyone. That's an old bio because my kids are out of college now, and I have 3 like grown children. That's a little wild to hear that because my kids now are 27, 28, and about to be 30. How did that happen? How did that happen? Anyway, it's fun to hear that though. But yeah, they are way out of college. I am so excited to be with you all today. And I'm sad. I love doing online, but I also really love seeing people's faces. So it's hard to not see all of you. There's so many of you. I can't see you all on one screen. So I've been scrolling up and down. But I'm happy to be in the presence of so many great early learning educators and coaches. And thank you so much for being here today. So we're doing the Pre-Elevate conference, Pre-Elevate webinar today. And I really want to set you up as coaches to be able to support your teams really well during and after the conference. And so the purpose of today is to really unpack what does it mean to be a liberatory leader? What does that mean? That's a big word that I think we love in education. We use all these big words. And sometimes if we don't take time to define them, they really don't mean anything. They're just big words. And so I want to make sure today that we are all on the same page when it comes to what is a liberatory leader. But even before that, there are 3 things that I do wherever I go. And a lot of you have heard me this year already either in Yakima or just this week in Lacey. Anybody with me in Lacey this week? Who was with me in Lacey this week? Maybe nobody here. Okay. I've been with so many different iterations of your group in the last month. Like, hey, which group? Anyway, the beautiful art behind me. So I collect art. And if you are in the Lacey community, we have a cultural center in Tumwater, and we have all art like this. And the owner of that cultural center gifted me her favorite piece. So this is one of the pieces. If you were to see around my office, I have another matching one over here. And then I have a me on the wall. It's not me actually, but somebody found it at Ross and said, Erin Jones, I think there's a painting of you. I don't know why they would buy a painting of me to put on my wall, but I have paintings of me that people give me, but this is my favorite piece. So that is why it's behind me. And I should show you this, because if you're ever on a call with me, you will see me do this. Look what I found at Ross last week. Like it was made for me, y'all. I do this all the time. So I had to buy it and put it behind me just as a reminder that we love well. We love well in this space, and love is so much a part of how I lead. Love is how I lead. And as we talk about liberatory leadership, I talk a lot about love, and people may think, what does love have to do with education? For me, everything. For me, everything. Everything that I do is about loving people. It's about learning to love myself as a person. It's about learning how to love people who are around me. It's about learning how to love people who are really different from me. And so that's my invitation to you today, is to join me in a conversation about how to love yourself first. Here's the thing that I know. So I have not been in education 26 years now. This is year 34. I'm walking into year 34 of education now. And here's what I know after 34 years in education. If you do not love yourself well as an educator, you cannot love the children or the adults that you serve. You can't love them well. And so I want to encourage you to think about today, how are you loving yourself well? It's really, really important. So part of our work today is really about self-love too, and understanding yourself. Can you all hear me? Because things are freezing over here. Okay. So here's what I want to start with. If you've ever been with me at all, I always start with gratitude. And part of the reason I start with gratitude is because gratitude changes our brain chemistry and helps us to become the best version of ourselves. It helps us to find hope when things are falling apart in the world. And I don't know about you, but when I look at our country, when I look at the world, there's a lot of stuff happening that's not fabulous. But if we can practice gratitude, it will help us find hope and opportunity. And so in the chat today, and I love that Patty already set us up by inviting you to use the chat. In the chat today, I want to kick us off by inviting you to share, what is one thing that you are grateful for today? Now, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a really big thing. Like I think about Michael Snow, who is not here today because he's on his honeymoon. Yay, he's got a big gratitude today. Probably most of our gratitudes are not big like that, but I want you to share, what is something that you are grateful for today? And it could be a little tiny something or a really big something. Oh, I love it. Lots of family stuff. Yay. Pumpkin spice tea. Yes, I love that. Yes. Oh, 32-year-old daughter. I love that too. Oh, health providers who work on your back. Yes. Oh, Seahawks. Yes. The weather. It is not pouring right now. Yes, I like it. Yes, I love that. An interested 8-year-old. I love me some 8-year-olds too. So 8-year-olds, I see you out there. I see you out there. I hope you'll enjoy this too. And that is okay. You know what? I want to offer, someone shared in the chat that they have a headache and so they're not using their camera. Typically when I do training, I like for people to have their cameras on. However, if your camera, I think about the numbers of people I know who are neurodivergent, for whom the camera causes them anxiety, turn it off. I would rather your camera be off and you be able to stay engaged. Okay, so I want to invite you, if the camera creates anxiety for you, shut it off. However, if you know you're shutting off your camera because you're trying to hide or go answer some emails, don't do that. Okay, so only shut that camera off if it creates anxiety. If you're able to better focus by not having to stare into a screen, do that. But I want to invite you, don't just turn it off and run away and try to get chores done, okay? But I want to invite you today, please use the chat as much as possible. I am able, oh, I love the picture. Yes, thank you for the photo. I love that. I am a really quick reader. So if you have questions at any point while I'm talking, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and I will try to get to you. And if I don't catch it right away, somebody from the team catch it and send me a message again, but I will do the best I can. My gratitude today is that I got to spend 2 days in Oregon this week at a high school that has never seen an adult who looks like me. And there were parents that complained, didn't even know what I was going to be talking about, and complained to the principal all week long. And then I showed up and the kids didn't want to leave the auditorium. So I ended up in the auditorium for 2 hours after my speech yesterday, just holding kids who needed to be held. The principal cried in the corner and said, oh my, I had no idea. And I said, you know what? I just come to share my story and to connect and love, again, love on some young people. Our children, our middle and high school children, are really struggling right now. And social media is a great thing, and it's a really terrible thing. And for a lot of our young people, they're really struggling right now. And I am grateful that I got to just show up in a space. And I didn't look like any of the children in that room, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I got to love on them and hug some kids and just remind them that they are enough. And that is my gratitude, that I get to be in so many different kinds of spaces. So that's my gratitude today. The second thing I want to talk about, and when we talk about liberatory leadership, this is also going to feed into how you can show up as a liberatory leader. I think how we show up in space is really important. And so if you've ever heard me speak before, I talk about brave spaces, not safe spaces. I don't think it's possible to create safe spaces. And here's what I mean by that. I don't think it's possible to create a space where every single person at all times feels safe. I just don't think that's possible. I think at any point in time, if you're neurodivergent, you may feel a certain kind of way. Maybe you're just having a bad day today. Maybe the conversation pricks something in you that you're walking through in your personal life. I want to create a space today that is safe enough for you to be brave. Safe enough for you to be brave. I don't want to pretend that I can create a space that is safe at all times for everybody, but I do want to create a space where you are able to be brave. And so I invite you today to brave. I invite you to brave today. And here's what that means for me. I will always lead with my own vulnerability. Especially in a webinar, I don't expect you to get vulnerable in the chat. I mean, if you want to type out a whole essay, you can, I suppose, but I'm not asking you for that today. But here's what I will do today. I will always model my own vulnerability. I will model my own struggles. I will model my own failures. I'll model my own hard stories, because I don't believe that I can ask people to do what I'm not willing to do. And so I always lead by example to the best of my ability. And so that's my first promise to you all, is that I will lead with vulnerability. Here's my second ask of all of us. And I ask you, and I'm going to hold myself accountable as well. I think when it comes to conversations that are difficult, we do a lot of shaming, blaming, and guilting right now in this country, especially on social media, but even in person. We do a lot of shaming, blaming, and guilting of people. If someone doesn't have the exact right word, they don't say something at the right time, they don't say the thing that you thought they should say. I want to invite us to not do that in this space. I want to invite us to have grace for people. Maybe you had to come, maybe you were forced to come to this webinar, I don't know. But I'm going to assume that every single one of you is showing up today willing to learn and grow. And just like our children, we're going to make mistakes. We are. And I say we in that. I don't say you. I say we, because I'm going to include myself in that. I will make mistakes. And so I invite us to be kind to ourselves when we make a mistake. And when you make a mistake, apologize. So when you say something that you know is harmful and hurtful, maybe you see people's reactions to it and you realize, oh my gosh, now that I think about what I said, that was really offensive. Apologize. I think we don't do enough of that, especially as leaders. We don't just say, wow, I am sorry. What I said there was really hurtful. How I said that was not thoughtful at all. It wasn't considerate. Apologize. So I want no shame, blame, or guilt. So don't shame, blame, or guilt others. Don't shame, blame, or guilt yourself when you make a mistake. Apologize, and then pivot. Pivot back to learning. Pivot back to listening. So no shame, blame, or guilt for yourself or others. And then lastly, in this space today, I invite you to stay curious. I invite you, if you hear a word that triggers you, it's a word that you've been told is a word that is offensive, I want to encourage you to, instead of getting offended, to just sit in that for a second. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What could I learn from this experience? Maybe you hear a story today, or maybe between now and Elevate, you hear a story that is not at all like your lived experience. I want to encourage you, instead of saying, oh, I've never experienced that, that can't possibly happen. Instead of that, I want to invite you to just sit in it and listen and stay curious. And again, I am not asking you to do what I'm not willing to do. I drove into South Central Oregon yesterday, where there is nobody like me. And I walked into a school where there was nobody like me, where I saw lots of flags and other paraphernalia that let me know I was in a community that was very different from the one I live in. And I walked in curious. Guess what? I didn't just come to be the expert on stage. I went to learn from the children too, and to get curious about their environment. And so today, I invite you to get and stay curious. It's really hard right now because we've been told, oh, if they look like this or they vote this way, they're the bad guy. I want to invite us today to not do that, to stay curious. And I know that's really hard, and it takes courage. It takes courage to stay curious, but I invite us to that kind of courage today. So in the chat, if there's anything else that you need today from me to be your best and bravest self, and also we'll be taking a break at 3 o'clock. So If you need a bio break, though, y'all are adults. You're grown folks. If you need to step away and go to the bathroom, make sure you turn your camera off and turn the sound off on your phone or your computer before you go. But you do not need my permission to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. And just like turning off your phone or turning off your camera, if you are getting up to escape a conversation, don't do it then. Don't pretend you have to go to the bathroom. But I trust you all. You're all grown folks. Get up and go to the bathroom. Don't feel like you have to wait until I give you permission. Step away, go to use the bathroom, go get a drink of water, stretch if you need to, and come back. Okay. Anything else that you need, though, in the chat, share anything else that you need from me today to be your best and bravest self. Anything else you need before we take a breathing break and then get going? Okay. So the third thing I always do, I always start with gratitude. Second, we talk about what does it mean to be brave. Third thing I always do is we pause to do a breathing activity. And here's why. I suspect that a lot of you have had other meetings today. How many of you, by raise of hands, have had other meetings today? Yes. Yes, I figured some of you might have had other meetings today. Here's what I know to be true, especially when we're on Zoom a lot, is that we can go from one Zoom meeting to the next, and not get up from our computer and not take a break. And what happens is you bring meeting 1 into meeting 2 into meeting 3, and you eat your lunch during meeting 4. And then by the time you get to me this afternoon, you've got 4 meetings and a lunch on your brain. And so I really intentionally do breathing activities between every meeting, even if I only have 10 seconds. So we're just going to take 20 seconds today to do a breathing activity. And this is a really great strategy to teach to your staff. It's a really great strategy to teach to little kids. Little people as little as 3 and 4 years old, I have taught them, we don't do 20 seconds. We start with 5 and then 10. They can get to 20 seconds eventually, but with you all, we're going to do 20 seconds of deep breathing. If you could sit up as straight as you are physically able to in your chair, just to get your chest cavity as open as possible. Get your feet planted on the floor if you are able. If you are my mom and just under 5 feet tall, you may not be able to put your feet on the floor, but if you can, get your feet on the floor. And I like to ask people to do that because I imagine our feet connecting us all across Washington State, wherever we are through the earth. I imagine that. I like to close my eyes to do this activity just because I get distracted by stuff. So if you don't like to close your eyes, if you feel unsafe doing that, find a spot behind your computer and just focus on that spot. And we're going to take 20 seconds to just breathe deeply. I want you to focus all of your energy on listening to and feeling the air as it goes in and out of your body. As thoughts come into your head, cast them out. Hey, nope, body, we're just going to listen to and feel the air. I like to put my hand on my chest just because it gives me a point of contact and that helps me stay focused. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. One last deep breath in. Blow it out. Open your eyes, stretch a little bit. Stretch. I really do want to encourage you to incorporate these 3 things into meetings. As you're meeting with people, start with gratitude. Talk about how you're going to be brave together and then end with a breathing activity. It may sound weird right now, but I promise you the more you can do it, the more that becomes habit for you, just the better off you will be. So let's jump into liberatory leadership. I am going to put into the chat. Actually, does anybody have an idea of what liberatory leadership is before I give you any answers? Who has an idea? Who has an idea about what and I'd love to hear voices if anybody would like to share out loud, or you can make a stab at this in the chat. You can give me, what do you think liberatory leadership is? What is liberatory leadership? Give you a moment. Progression, good. Yeah. Any other thoughts about liberatory leadership? Listening to all voices, yep. Collaboration, yeah. Listening to all voices, individuality, yep. Equity, yep. Shared, yep. Lifting others up. Awesome. Awesome. Equity at the table, shared power. Yep, transferring power to a collective. Good. Inclusive. Awesome. Great answers. So I'm going to share maybe in the chat. I'm going to share with you, possibly. Oh, maybe not. I'm going to read to you first and then maybe share my definition of liberatory leadership. Let's see if I can share this in the chat though. Let me see. This Zoom is a little bit different than what I'm used to. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. So for those of you that like to read stuff, I just shared an image in the chat, but I want to read to you how I understand liberatory leadership. And I want you to be thinking, which of these really resonates for you? Liberatory leadership can include, so it doesn't mean it has to, but it can include interrogating how our different identities impact the work we do, practicing leadership at both the individual and organizational levels, building relationships among those who share identities with us and across difference to lead change towards positive climate and equity, advocating for fair treatment and opportunities for others, engaging in courageous conversations about dehumanizing language, behaviors, and policies, understanding privilege and mitigating personal biases, which we all have. All of us have personal biases, actually, in plural. Setting conditions for safe, brave spaces where both healing and interruption can occur. And lastly, pushing to include diverse, affirming traditions and cultural lived experiences within our community. And you've seen that in the chat. So much in the chat is connected to that way of thinking about liberatory leadership. So much of liberatory leadership is about understanding your own identity, though. So I want to do some activities, especially with you as coaches, around identity, just because I think so often we as educators and education leaders are not doing our own personal work. And we need to be doing more work about who am I and how am I showing up in a space. So I'm going to invite you, if you can, to go grab an index card or open the notes page in your phone. So I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to find a scratch piece of paper, a note card, or open the index card, or open the note page in your phone or on a computer, if you're able to do that. So grab something. You're going to need something to jot some notes on or type some notes in, whatever is more comfortable for you. So take about 10 more seconds and find something that you can write on or type in, because we're going to do our own some self-work today to get you ready for Elevate. Okay, on your sheet of paper, and I know those of you who were with me in Yakima, I invited you to do this in Yakima, but I'm going to ask you to do this again, just really quickly. I want you to answer the question, why do you do what you do, where you do it? And I will type that in the chat. Why do you do what you do, where you do it? Why do you do what you do, where you do it? This is just a warm-up activity. Why do you do what you do, where you do it? Take about a minute to jot down. You don't need to write an essay. You're not writing a book. Just jot down some notes. Why do you do what you do, where you do it? And if you can even be more specific, I appreciate in the chat what you shared. If you could even be, what about this work really makes you feel fulfilled? What makes you feel fulfilled? The more specific you can get, the better. Why do you do what you do, where you do it? And I would say I am definitely fulfilled in the work that I do too. And I also know that part of the reason is I get to watch people grow. I get to watch both children and adults grow and find their purpose. I get to use the gifts that I have to help other people find theirs and develop theirs. Why do you do what you do, where you do it? Awesome. Yeah, these are great answers. Yeah, thank you. To inspire, yeah. So great. So good, yeah. cherish and enjoy the relationships built with children and adults. Yeah, that's good. So that why you do what you do question is really important. Liberatory leadership takes work. It takes a lot of work. It means having really uncomfortable conversations. And if people aren't really clear about why they do what they do, those difficult conversations won't happen. People will run away from them if you're not really clear about why you're here. Oh, I love that because I was once that kid. Yeah. My son is becoming a classroom teacher to be the teacher he didn't get to have. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yes, advocate. Yep, I love that. Awesome. These are great answers. So I would invite you to think about who are the people on your team that you could share your answer with who are not here today. So as you support other educators, as you're talking with classroom teachers and families, what are ways that you can share your why with them, just to remind them of why you do the work you do? It's so important. Yeah, I love these. You know, it's funny. I know you all are early learning folks, but I can't tell you the number of times I talk to upper elementary, middle, and high school children who think their teachers just do what they do for money. And it just makes me laugh. Like, they don't get paid as much as you think. And y'all, for sure, as early learning folks, would not be doing this work if it were just for money. So I think it's really important to share out with families and with the community why this work is so important. So I want to encourage you to share your why story. Yeah, bridge the gap. Yeah. Support teachers and children. Yes, I love that. Kim, my mantra that's at the bottom of my email is my number one job as an adult is to be a mirror to reflect the beauty and brilliance that comes into my presence. That's my number one job with children. I love that. Advocate for people who struggle with things I excel in. That's good. Yeah. So let's do a little bit more heavy lifting of really unpacking identity, because part of liberatory leadership is recognizing that there are ways power plays a role in how we show up to our work, and how power dynamics work in the United States is a little bit different than how it works in other places. And so understanding the elements of identity is really critical. So we'll start with just 3 right now. I'm going to read off all 10 elements of identity, but before the break, we'll just focus on 3. So when you look at sociology and psychology, there are 10 kind of big identity categories that often they talk about. And we're going to break those down into smaller pieces. But those 10 elements are race, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, ability, socioeconomic background, family structure, religious or spiritual practices, and then political affiliation. Those 10 things have the biggest impact on how we move through the world, how other people see us, but also how we experience systems in the world. Those 10 things. And so I'm going to invite you today to interrogate those 10 things. Now, if you are someone who is willing to share your responses in the chat, you can. However, I'm not going to ask you to do this out loud unless you want to. So that's why I've asked you to get a sheet of paper out, because I want you to do as much work as possible. And if you have to do that quietly and not for anyone else to see, this is not about anybody else but you. We become better liberatory leaders the more we know ourselves. And so today's work is really about you. And if you want to share your answers in the chat, you can. But I actually would invite you to keep your answers on your piece of paper right now, just because I want this to be about your own personal work today. So let's unpack the first 3 terms. Race, ethnicity, culture. Race is a created term. It's a created idea. It was created actually even before the United States became a country. It was created by really a pope began this whole conversation about skin color as a way to decide who could be saved and who needed saving, who was worthy of saving, and who could be in charge. And that's really how the Pope back in 1620 or 1630 decided who to send where to take the Catholic message. And that's really how the idea of race was begun. But race is a created thing. There's no biology to race. So you cannot look at someone's skin color and decide anything about them. You don't know anything about a person based on their skin color, but we have assigned meaning in the United States to skin color. Now, in the chat, this is not about you. This is about us as a country. Why in the United States do we have unique? Why do we have our own stories about skin color that may be different from stories in other countries? Like, why might Mexico have different stories about skin color than France or South Africa or Pakistan? Why do we have our own unique stories in the United States about skin color? Who has an idea? Why do we have unique stories that are different from other countries about skin color? Slavery? Yeah. Real life? Yeah. Slavery for sure. What are some other reasons that we have unique stories about skin color in the United States? Slavery is a big one, but there are a couple other really big ones. So even before slavery, what's another big encounter? Colonization for sure. Yep. Yes, to make one group feel superior. So the whole idea of creating this idea of race was about deciding who could be in power and who could be controlled. Who was deserving of owning things and who was deserving of being owned. And that was really the origin story of skin color in the United States. And it did have everything to do with economics and power and privilege. Absolutely. And stories, I want to read this because this is brilliant. Yes, stories are created to give power. Okay. And so race is the stories that we tell about skin color. Race is the stories that we tell about skin color. No, it is a created thing. And so are those stories true? Often they are not true. Most of the times they are not true. But because enough people believe them, we have to talk about them, because when people hear stories and they believe them, they begin to have power. And so it's really important to realize that, as many people would like to say, let's be colorblind, this country is not colorblind. This country has never been colorblind. Yeah, I don't want to talk about the event that happened 2 days ago, but those who know, this country has never been colorblind. Justice has never been colorblind. And so we have to have a willingness, and this is why liberatory leadership is hard. We have to have a willingness to interrogate, to ask questions about, what are the stories that I was told as a child about skin color in general? What were the stories I was told about my own skin color and about other people's skin color? And so I'm going to invite you to think for a moment, and on your sheet of paper to yourself, don't type in the chat, when was the first time you were aware of your skin color and that your skin color was different from someone else's? I don't want you to share in the chat, just on your sheet of paper, how old were you when you realized that race was a thing, that stories were told about skin color, that you had a skin color? And I'm just going to, before you start writing, some of you, it may have been just 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and that's okay. No shame, blame, or guilt. If you had never thought about race as a thing until recently, it's okay to acknowledge that. Okay. So race is number one. Number two is ethnicity. Oftentimes, people talk about race and ethnicity as if they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. So race is the stories we tell about skin color. Ethnicity is the stories we tell about where our people are from. So whether your people are indigenous, they're tribal people, whether your people are from Central America, whether they are from France, Germany, from the continent of Africa somewhere, that is your ethnicity. That's your heritage. It's where your family has come from over time. Now, there are people like me who are adopted who don't know their ethnic heritage. Some of you, how many of you have families that have so many different ethnic heritages that there's not just one that you could say you are? How many of you are a mix of many things? Yeah, so many people in the United States right now don't have one or two that they can go back to. There are big, broad mix of lots of things. I want to invite you though, when someone asks you, what's your ethnic heritage? And you're not sure, please don't say, I'm just American, because how that feels for folks is, it feels like, unless you were an indigenous person, it feels like your people didn't come here somehow, and it takes away from the indigenous people who were here for a long time. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna clear that up. Race is a social construct. There's also a lot of confusion about ethnicity and nationality. Your nationality is the nation in which you now call yourself a citizen or a long-term resident. That's nationality. Ethnicity is if you came from another place before you got here, that's your ethnic heritage. Are there traditions that you celebrate? Is there a language that you practice at home that you don't speak at work? That is all part of ethnicity. Okay, so race is the stories we tell about skin color. Ethnicity is the story we tell about our people group, and our history. Culture. I hear a lot of Americans say, I don't have culture. And what you really mean is, I don't know my ethnic heritage. We all have culture. We all have culture. And what is culture? Culture is the way that we make meaning of the world with people, a group of people with whom we share time and space. So your house has a culture. Your house has a culture. Your work, your job has a culture. Guess what? The different early learning centers that are on this webinar right now have different cultures, because it's different groups of people in different physical locations having different lived experiences, and you learn to make meaning of the world in different ways. Okay, I'm going to ask you to do an activity for this one, and you're going to need to find the hand raise feature on your Zoom app. Find the hand raise feature. If you can't find that, you can use the clappy hands if you want to, but I want everybody to find the hand raise feature right now. Use the hand raise feature if in your house as a child, think about yourself, go in the Wayback Machine for you as a kid. If it was important to be places on time, raise your hand. Use the hand raise feature. If it was important to you to be places on time as a child, right? We got a lot of y'all. Wow. Okay. There's a lot of you. Okay, over half. Awesome. Put your hands down. Thank you. How many of you grew up in homes where being on time was not important? You were never on time anywhere. How many of you grew up in that home? I knew there was going to be some of y'all. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So do you know time is part of culture? And I want to invite you that when we think about culture, the three most important elements of culture that create conflict in workspaces are time, proximity, that means how close you get to people, people who are used to being touched or not touched, and then noise level. Those three things cause the greatest conflict in workspaces, because often we make assumptions about what is right and what is our cultural norm we expect everybody else to just adhere to. And so part of liberatory leadership is realizing, okay, I grew up in a house where we had to be on time all the time, but not everybody around me grew up in that home. And so how can I not judge that person's character based on something that is merely a cultural difference? So I want to invite you to think about that. And I will send you a little homework to do on that later after the conference, so that you can really be ready for next week, because culture is really complicated. Yes, time also means different things in different cultures, and how we set a value to time and which things it's important to be on time for also depends on the culture you're in. And neurological differences, absolutely. I have a kid in my house who's ADD, and I have one who's on the autism spectrum. For my kid on the autism spectrum, he has got to be on time, because nothing can change. He has to be, everything has to exist right here. My ADHD kid, squirrel, he's off doing something else. So yes, sometimes it's not cultural, sometimes it's neurodivergence that causes that. But I just want you to think about we're going to take a little break here, but I want you to be thinking about race, ethnicity, and culture. When we come back, I'm going to ask this question. How have those three things shaped how you move through the world, especially as a leader? How have those three things, your race and how people perceive your race, your ethnic background, if you know what it is, and then culture, the cultural norms that you have, how have those three things shaped how you move through the world, how you ended up in this work, how you work as a leader? Okay, we are going to take a break. Okay, let's get started with our last portion of the webinar. So in the chat, here's what I want you to answer. If you are willing to be courageous, so I'm inviting, I'm not mandating, I'm inviting. If you are willing to be courageous, I want you to think about the first three elements of identity that we just talked about. Race, the stories we tell about skin color. Ethnicity, the story I tell about my own people and history. And then culture, the ways that I have made meaning, that my community has made meaning of the place that I live. Which of those three do you believe has had the greatest impact on who you are and how you move through the world? Which of those has had the greatest impact? If you could type in the chat, race, ethnicity, or culture. Which has had the greatest impact on who you are and how you move through the world? Thank you for sharing. Yeah, lots of culture. And here's the thing that I didn't specifically say. You cannot look at someone's race and assume you know their culture. Culture and race are not the same thing. Now, ethnicity and culture are connected, but race and culture, you don't know. Yep. Yeah, that's really good, April. That's really good. Yeah, I think for me, yeah, it's a blend of race and culture, because I grew up as a Black girl in Europe, came back to an America that I didn't really understand. So I had to not only navigate American culture, but also navigate what it meant to be red and raised as a Black girl, having lived in Europe. So it was very confusing for the first 20 years in the United States. And then I'm married to a Black man whose culture is very different from mine. So we've had to navigate that culture together, but navigating that culture with him has helped me help other people navigate culture. So I see that as an asset. Yeah, your culture is a response to your race. Yeah. And often, by the way, often people's race and culture are connected not because of their skin color, but because of where people were forced to live. Because of redlining, Black people were pushed into common neighborhoods, and so their culture ended up being the same because they were pushed into neighborhoods where they lived together. Indigenous people pushed onto the reservation, and so how did those cultures develop? It's really not your skin color that drives the culture, but it is where you shared space. And for so many people in the United States, neighborhoods became the driving force of culture, and those neighborhoods were created by codes and by whether it was redlining or just other housing codes. So race and culture are sometimes can be the same thing because of that, but it's really not based on skin color as much as it is where people lived, whether they all came from the South. There's also Southern culture, which is different from Pacific Northwest culture. Okay, so next we're going to jump to the next three just for the sake of time. Our next three are gender, and I'm going to say gender/sexual orientation because those often get kind of blended together. So gender, sexual orientation, age, and then ability. And here's what those three mean. Gender and sexual orientation is both how you understand yourself and how other people perceive you. Much like race, there are ways that people perceive our identities around gender and sexual orientation that actually have nothing to do with how we perceive ourselves. So it is as important for you to know, how do I want to move through the world? How do I want to be identified? But also be aware that other people may interpret you in a very different way than you interpret yourself. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chelsea. Culture and race interact with each other because of perception, identity, and access. Yeah. And so much of that goes back to the stories that we tell in this country. So just being aware of what is the area that you are swimming in? What are the movies that you watched as a child? How were you raised to think about different groups of people? Well, let's think about sexual orientation and gender right now. I want you to jot down on a piece of paper, how have your gender and sexual orientation affected how you move through the world? And I don't want you to feel pressure here to share in the chat. This is between you and your piece of paper, you and your computer, but I want you to kind of unpack how have those things played a role for you and how you see yourself and how you move through the world, how you lead other people. Gender and or sexual orientation. Absolutely. Absolutely, Kelly. Yeah, we are so impacted by how other people perceive us. In fact, I just had lunch before this with a friend of mine who is male presenting but identifies as a female, and we talked about that. We talked about the fact both of us are basketball players, and there was a time in my life where I remember walking through a hallway at a middle school one day as a substitute teacher, and a boy came up from behind me and said to his friend, is that a woman or a man? So I'm really flat chested and I had really short hair at the time. And I never forget that day. I can remember which hallway I was in at Hunt Middle School. But my friend was talking about how she presents as more masculine, but she identifies as a woman. And just the ways that people see her because her hair is short, we have all these ideas. And those ideas affect how we move through the world. Even if we're really sure about who we are, how other people perceive us and the ways we're supposed to fit into particular categories can affect how we move through the world. Second one, age. And this again is both your perceived age and your actual age. Funny story, yesterday I was speaking at Baker City High School in Eastern Oregon, and I asked the kids, I don't remember why I asked them, but I asked the kids how old they thought I was. And all of the kids thought, 25, 29, 26. So nobody guessed over 30. And I said, I'm 53 years old. And the kids, you could hear the collective gasp in the room. And it is really awesome to look younger than you are when you're with teenagers. It is not really awesome to look 26 when you're leading stuff and you're supposed to look like the expert, because in the United States, we often don't perceive young people as being experienced. On the other side of that, I think about the last 5 years that my parents were teachers, and they were feeling like they were being pushed out of education because they were perceived as too old to have any value. And I will tell you, because I got to be in both of their classrooms in their last year, man, they still had so much to offer. But we tend to write off those that are too old, in quotes, and we tend to write off those that are too young. And there's also intersectionality with how we think about women who are in their elder years versus men who are in their elder years. We tend to write off women and we see men as being like the right level of expert when they have gray hair. And so it's a really different dynamic. It's really complicated. Age is a really complicated thing. But I want you to think about for yourself the season that you are in right now. How does that age season affect how you move through the world, how you lead? Just to lead with vulnerability again, I went through menopause 3 years ago. And so even for me, that having been through menopause and all the mess that is, if there are any young men on the call, the mess that is menopause that you will never have to go through, but just the lack of self-confidence that happens during menopause, the ways that your body changes, all of those things. And how often are women in leadership going through menopause? Think about how old women are when they take on leadership roles. They're often either approaching menopause, going through, or just out of. And we don't ever talk about that. And I think we need to. I think it's important. How age with hiring. Yeah. Yep. So age is a really important piece. Last one is ability. And even though they title it ability, it's really, what are the disabilities that you have, visible or invisible? In the chat, what are some invisible disabilities? What are some invisible disabilities? Oh, that's real too. Being invisible as you get older. Yeah. Anxiety, yes. Migraine, yes. ADD, chronic pain, yes. Mental illness, neurodivergence, yes. ADHD, autism, depression, yes. Oh, colitis, yes. All of these. Yeah. Anxiety, epilepsy, yes. I had a student who was epileptic, and I knew that she was, but other people didn't know, and she looked perfectly healthy. And then one day in my class, she had a grand mal seizure. It was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. Oh, emotional dysregulation, yes. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, yeah. A severe illness, cancer, yes. Hearing impaired, yep. Trauma triggers, yes. Lots of medical issues, yes. And so just being aware that so many disabilities are actually, more of them are invisible than are visible. And so just to be aware that you have people around you who are walking through this stuff right now, and how can we humanize one another? How do you support one another when you don't know? You don't have to know all the details about what's happening in someone's life, but to be aware that all of these things are happening for people and may be affecting how they show up at work on a day. So my rule of thumb is, when somebody shows up, when I was an administrator, when someone showed up in my space and was really dysregulated, instead of discipline, it was always, hey, how can I show up for you today? Asking, getting curious. Hey, you are not, man, I'm seeing something in you today that I haven't seen before. Help me understand. How can I support you? Grief and trauma, yes. So I always assume when people act out, especially when they act out of their typical ways of being, I try to get really curious and then also step away. If I can tell something, I assume then that something really deep is going on. And I just invite them, hey, whenever you're ready, I want to show up for you the best way that I can. Oh, okay, April, I'm reading this out loud because yes, when you share about disorders, people assume how they look. Just because you do not present as ADHD or autistic, it doesn't look the same way. My son with ADD doesn't look at all like a lot of my students who had ADD. In fact, you wouldn't be able to tell that he's ADD unless you're with him for more than an hour. My son with autism, he's what they call a high functioning autistic. What that means is you don't see it right away, and he will perseverate on things. He struggles to make meaning of social interactions. Yeah, it doesn't look the same for everyone. That's so great. So just knowing that someone has ADD, just knowing that someone's dyslexic is not enough. Really taking the time, and liberatory leadership is taking the time to love people. I'm going to go back to love again, to love people enough to get to know your staff so that you know how to show up for them. And I think it's one of the greatest gifts of having been a middle school teacher, is I had to learn that if I had 30 kids in my classroom, each of those children needed something unique. And just knowing one aspect of them wasn't enough for me to show up for them fully. And so out of love, I did my best to watch and listen and ask questions and really get curious. And then always ask, how can I show up for you as your teacher to help you become your best self? And that's what we can do as coaches and leaders. So when you think about yourself, your personal self, when you think about your age, your gender, sexuality, and your abilities, which one of those three, if you're willing to share, and you don't have to, which one of those things has had the greatest impact on how you show up in your leadership role? So age, gender / sexuality, and then ability. Which of those three has had the biggest impact on how you show up in your leadership role? Yeah. There's a good mix here. It's a good mix here. Yeah, thank you. Now I want to encourage you, part of liberatory leadership is being aware of those things about your colleagues and about folks that you're serving, and then being willing to stand in the gap and say, hey, can we change this particular process so that my friend who's in this room can engage more effectively? Can we make sure that we add this tool? So part of liberatory leadership is being aware of these things. Being aware when you're in a space, is there a particular gender that has taken over the conversation? Are you willing to stand in and say, hey, we need to hear from some other folks here? Absolutely, it requires trust, and that really begins with relationship. You cannot have trust without relationship. Trust does not happen right away. Trust happens over time by being in community with each other and being vulnerable with each other. And here's the other thing about trust too. Trust requires that when we mess up, we fess up and apologize. It's really important. Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing that. Okay. Yep, humanizing each other. Absolutely. Yep, I talk about love and humanizing people the most in the work that I do with leaders. Yeah, really important. Well, let's hit the last 4 to close out our session today. So the last 4 are the most movable. These are things that you are not intrinsically born with. They're ways that we are raised up in families. And so these are really complicated. So let's try to tackle them. And part of being a liberatory leader is being willing to look inside and really wrestle with things that are hard. So first one is socioeconomic background. And that is really, I want you to think about yourself as a child. How were your ideas formed about resources? So did you grow up in a home that had access to all the resources you needed based on what you knew as a child? Do you think your parents, your family, your caregivers had access to, and that means not just money, because here's what I'll offer. I think some families don't have money, but they still have access to resources. So when I say resources, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about access to systems, knowing how to move through systems. Did your family have access to those things? Did they not have access? And part of access, I know, having come from another country, is also language. I spent most of my career teaching in schools where most of my students were 2nd, 3rd, 4th language speakers, and they were often translating for parents who didn't understand how to navigate systems. So I often had 12-year-olds that were trying to navigate health systems for their children and all kinds of things. Oh, Jill, that's real. Oh my gosh. Okay, 23, whoever that is, work has made. Yeah, oh my gosh. Can we talk about that for a second? Thank you for sharing that so vulnerably. I was telling a story last week with a group of my husband. I actually was Pete Buttigieg's, that's so hard to say, Pete Buttigieg's PE teacher. I taught at a private school for 2 years in South Bend, Indiana, when Pete was in the 8th grade, and he was in my PE class. And it was great to be at a private school in some ways, but I knew by the end of that, I wanted to work public school. But when I first got hired, I got hired as a substitute teacher, and it was awesome. And I got paid pretty well as a sub, and it was a great experience, and the kids were really great to me. And then they decided at the end of the year to hire me full-time for this job, and I get hired in June, and we're so excited. Oh my gosh, I got my first full-time teaching job, so excited. And then I'm playing in a soccer game the next week, and I trap the ball with my stomach and hurt like I have never hurt in my life, and we discover that I'm pregnant. And when we go to the doctor and discover I'm pregnant, I learned that I've been pregnant for 6 weeks. What does that mean? It's a pre-existing condition. And so the insurance that I was going to get through my private school no longer counted. So I had to go get Medicare for pregnant women. And that shame that you talked about, my husband was in graduate school at Notre Dame University. And this woman who was doing our paperwork in front of the whole room told my husband that it was a shame that he couldn't provide for his wife, and he should be embarrassed, and he should really drop out of his grad program and get a real job so that his wife wouldn't need Medicare for pregnant women. And I will never forget that experience. And it gives me so much more compassion for the students that I would later serve, whose families had to go through this too. And it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable. And for those of you that have experienced it, you know what that feels like, and you know then how to show up to your students and your families in a different way. And that's the piece I'm grateful for. I don't appreciate having gone through it. I don't like that I went through it, and it taught me how to support my students in a way that I might not have known otherwise. But this is real. For those of you that were made to feel ashamed, your families are made to feel ashamed. It's real. So second element of the last four. So first one, socioeconomic background. Second one is family structure. How many of you, by raise of hands, grew up in a home with just your immediate family? So that means it could be a single parent or two parent home, but no grandparents or aunties and uncles. You just grew up in a single family home. Okay. Okay, quite a few. Okay, you can take your hands down. How many of you grew up with extended family in your home? So you had uncles, aunties, grandparents, somebody else in your house besides just your immediate family. Yeah. These things inform how we see the world. So if this is your quote unquote normal to have grandma and aunties and uncles all in a house, it shapes how you see the world in a different way. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we were that house, April. Oh my gosh, we always had, we always had about 10 kids in our house too. Yeah, I was like your parents too. Yeah, my kids are like, Mom, can we just be us at some point, please? But all of those things shape how you see. You're that house now. That's funny. Oh my gosh. The chat. Yes, I love that so much. Okay, but family structure shapes how we see the world. I don't want you to raise your hand, but some of you probably grew up between two homes, either because of divorce or adoption or whatever. You grew up, that informs how you think about family in a different way. And so I just want us to be aware that how we experience family, single parent home, two parents, divorce, all of that stuff shapes how we move through the world. It shapes how we think about leadership. It often shapes how we think about gender. It shapes how we think about age. Yeah. Vivian, did you have something you wanted to add? Or did you just not take your hand down? Okay. Okay, last two. Religious or spiritual affiliation. And that is just, did your family have some sort of religious practice or spiritual practice in the home, around the home? But it also includes, did you grow up atheist? Are you atheist now? Are you agnostic now? Whether you have a religious affiliation that is really strong or maybe not strong informs you in a particular way. Being agnostic or atheist informs you in a particular way. Practicing a faith tradition that is not common in your community also informs you in a different way. So I think about myself. My husband was a pastor in a Christian church for a long time. My best friend is Muslim. And so we have watched each other navigate spaces really, really differently. We also have a really good friend who's Jewish, and we've watched her navigate space in a really different way. I have a friend who's Baha'i. Our faith traditions or not faith traditions shape how we move through the world and how we see through the world. Yeah, and then whether it's consistent or not. Wow, and that's really complicated. Jehovah's Witness, Catholic, and wow, and the ways of the street. Oh, I love that so much. Oh my gosh, the ways of the street. Yeah, that's okay. No, that's okay, Miriam. Last one. Political affiliation. I do not want you to share in the chat, but here's the real that you all know right now. Our political affiliations right now as a country are creating incredible division. And here's my invitation to you in this moment, especially as we think about liberatory leadership. My invitation to you in this moment, especially right now, is to stay curious about people around you, even and especially if you know how people vote around you. If you don't agree with how they are voting, it is not our job as education leaders to tell people, not our colleagues, not our families, how to vote. And I also want to invite you to not write off, just like somebody said in the chat, I don't ever write off whole swaths of kids in a particular way. I want to encourage you, don't write off like all Democrats in a particular way, or all Republicans in a particular way, or all independents in a particular way. I want to encourage you to be willing to engage in humanizing ways. And if you know that you struggle to talk about those things, then don't. Then don't. It's really important. One of the things that I have told teachers since I got into leadership is it's our job to teach every child, whether their parents vote like us or not, whether we agree with their parents' set of beliefs or not. It's my job to show up to every single child and every administrator, every teacher that I train, as if they are equally valuable in the world as I am, whether we agree or not. And so I want to encourage all of you, part of being a liberatory leader is, how do I show up? The one thing you can control is yourself. How can I show up a more healthy version of me? How can I show up the most humanizing version of myself? And so that means being kind to yourself. That means when you need to take a break, taking breaks. It means eating well. It means drinking water. It means thinking about how are you investing in people outside of work? So who are the people that are feeding your soul? What are the activities in and outside of work that are feeding your soul, so that you're able to show up at work and sit at a desk next to someone, be in meetings with someone who doesn't agree with you, and still see them as human because you're showing up as the best version of yourself. That is going to be really hard for the next couple of months and beyond. We're in a really tough space, and staying curious is really hard. And it's why I want to remind you to go back to the beginning. Practice that gratitude every single day. Practice gratitude every single day. Make sure that you're setting your own self up, your spirit up, your whole body up to be the best version of yourself. Take time to think about, how am I going to show up as the best and bravest version of me today? And then finally, breathe. To stop and breathe. When you can feel yourself getting anxious and frustrated, and whether it's with a parent or a colleague, maybe it's yourself, you just didn't do that activity well, take time to just stop and breathe and be kind to yourself. Because here's the thing, we cannot be liberatory leaders if we are not liberated ourselves. You cannot help people with the thing that you have not practiced yourself. So what can you do between now and the actual conference? Do some unpacking. Do some unpacking of your identities. Do some unpacking. I will send Patty both the definition of liberatory leadership, and I will also send her the 10 elements of identity. I want to encourage you as leaders and coaches. As leaders and coaches, I want to encourage you to do some self-work. Do some really honest unpacking of your own story and how you show up in this work. I believe the more clear you are about yourself, the more clear you are about how you move through the world, the better you are able to show up for other people. Okay, I'm going to stop talking here and let you ask me any questions that you want to. If you want to just share something that was an aha for you, or something that resonated for you that you want to lift up in the space, I'm going to give time for that. But we have about 7 minutes left, and I want to open the floor for anybody who has a question or a thought that they want to share. Yes, it holds space for healing. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And guess what? We all need to heal. All of us need to heal in some way. So I'm right there with you in this. And I was telling my friend at lunch today, I have not arrived yet. and I don't plan to ever arrive. I plan to be in this process for the rest of my life. Kelly, go ahead.
I just have a question about something I hadn't heard before, and I'm curious about it. You said that, let me think what you said again. Oh, that practicing gratitude changes brain chemistry. Is that?
It literally, yeah, it literally
changes.
It changes the dendrites in your brain. So my one of my friends did her PhD thesis to become a superintendent, and her whole focus was on the science of gratitude. And it literally, if you will practice gratitude regularly, so that's once a day at least, it literally reforms the dendrites in your brain. And it creates what's called a positive neural network. And that positive neural network, it's in your frontal lobe. It allows you to find positive even when things are difficult. So yeah, there's a ton of science, and even since her research has come out, I've been paying a lot more attention. There's so much. So if you just Google the science of gratitude, there's so much science to gratitude now that's out.
Okay. Thank you for.
Yes. Oh, sure. Yes, I do use those terms. So somebody asked in the chat, could I share about terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Yes, I do. And actually, I have a page of definitions that I could put into a slide that I sent to Patty as well. Diversity is all the ways that we are different, all the ways that we're different. That means race, gender, all the 10 elements of identity that we just talked about. It's all the ways that we are different, including our neurodiversity, including the ways that we learn. And diversity for me is about lifting those up, like seeing those as assets, not as deficits. So that's diversity. Equity is realizing that equity is not equal. So a lot of times people use equity and equality as the same, or equity and equality is the same thing. They're not. Equity is about realizing that in order to get everyone to flourishing or thriving, we need different things to get there. And sometimes equity is about eliminating barriers. So eliminating practices or policies that are causing harm. Sometimes it means building bridges. So I talk about equity as bridges. It's building bridges and eliminating barriers, but it's all about getting human to thriving. Sometimes people say to success, I don't use the word success because I think success is about money and stuff. And I think for a lot of cultures, that's not what motivates them. So I talk about getting people to thriving. It's giving them what they need and taking away barriers and giving them supports where they need it. And then inclusion is the practices that we create in a business or organization to try to help people towards belonging. Inclusion is the practices. Belonging is the feeling that I matter here, that my voice will be heard here. I'm not just at the table, but I actually, when I speak, people hear me. They think my words matter. But inclusion are the practices that we develop in an institution and an organization to try to help more people feel that sense of belonging. So inclusion are the practices. Belonging is the feeling that I have that I actually belong in this space. But I actually have a slide that I can send as well. Does that work though? Yes, I do use those words. Even though I get a lot of crap from people for using those words. There's a lot of people that don't like those words, but I think they're real. I tend to spend a lot more time talking about belonging, especially in school spaces, and helping us think about what are the things that we can do for the adults to make sure adults feel a sense of belonging. Because I think when adults feel a sense of belonging, they create spaces where all students can feel a sense of belonging. So I think sometimes we just focus on the students and we don't think about the adults in our space. And I think leadership, it reflects down. And so whatever we're doing up here will impact the children down here. Other questions or thoughts? Staff, questions or thoughts? Yes, there is a lot of great research on belonging too. Yep. There's one of my friends just read a book called oh my gosh, Dignity Through a Culture of Belonging, Jonathan Crownapple. And that's a great education book. Jonathan Crownapple, if you look him up. But yeah, there's such, you know, when people belong in a space, they are able to show up as their full self. If I don't get your full self in the space, I'm not going to get your best work. So as a boss, as an employer, as a leader, as a teacher in my classroom, when I see my students as their full self and I celebrate all the ways they show up for me as the best version of themselves. So there's so much great research, but it also is it's so simple too. Like how I think we need to focus a lot more attention on making sure we're creating spaces, not just where people are tolerated, but where they get to truly belong. I think we all want that. Every human wants that. But Jonathan Crownapple has done a lot of great research around belonging in schools. Last question. We got 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Patty, Leah, anything?
I don't know if this is a question. I'm reflecting on one of the last things you said, which was we cannot, excuse me, we cannot be liberatory leaders if we are not liberated ourselves. That makes sense to me, but we live in a society where we are not liberated. And so, I don't know how to, I'm just processing that.
No, it's messy. I love that you shared that because it's super messy, isn't it? Like, it's a messy, and America is a particularly messy place. And so I think, and I think it's also why I invite that I am constantly working towards my own liberation, right? So I don't think we're ever going to get there. So I think it's this aspirational, I am going to, within a broken system that seeks to confine me, I am going to do the best I can to be as free as I possibly can in order to free others. But that is such a, I mean, it's really true. It's really true. And yeah, I think I can only control the things that I have control over, but in that, I'm going to do my best to be liberated and to promote liberation, even in the midst of the messy world that is the one we live in. But I appreciate your sharing that, though, because that's real. The 23, I don't know who you are, but every time you put something in the chat, I just like, I want to know whoever 23 is. I want to know who you are because you are amazing. Okay, so my commitment to you all, I will send the image that I put in the chat. I will send the 10 elements of identity. I will send my page with the definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. If you're interested, I have 3 TED Talks. Those of you that have not heard me before, I have 3 TED Talks. You can find those just by Googling Erin Jones. And if I can ever help you all, please let me know. I really am in this to support us, all of us. And so if there's ever a way that I can show up for you all and just be a listening ear, I am on, I'll type in the chat, I'm on all the socials, well, except for Snapchat, because that's for kids and I don't do Snapchat and it's dangerous. But I'm on, and I also don't do X anymore because it's a hot mess. But I'm on TikTok at Afro Educator. And I am, actually, I always forget that I now actually have my own website. So it's Erin Jones Dreams is my website. So you can get all of my information there. Actually, that's probably easier than trying to type out all of this, but I will type this all out anyway. But at Erin Jones Dreams on Instagram. And if you send me a message to either one of those, I will answer right away. I am not great with email because I get like 1,000 emails a day and I just can't get to them all, but I will respond to any message that you send me on social media. And if you desperately need me, your leaders have my cell number too. So feel free to reach out to me there. Again, I'm in your corner. I am here to support you. Thank you for what you do. Okay, everyone, have a really phenomenal day. I will see you again at the Elevate Conference.